You know that feeling when you're with someone who swears you're their world, yet something in your gut tells you there's more to the story? Their words may say commitment, but their energy whispers escape. You notice the late replies, the sudden bursts of charm followed by silence, the vague excuses that never quite add up. And you start to ask yourself, am I imagining this? Am I too needy, too insecure, too much? But deep down, there's a knowing that while you've been pouring yourself into this bond, they've been scattering themselves across multiple worlds. Here's the contradiction that cuts: the deepest avoidant partners crave the safety of being chosen by someone loyal, while secretly keeping escape hatches open in the form of other people. They want the stability of your love, but the thrill of distraction. They stand in front of you declaring exclusivity, while behind the curtain they are texting, flirting, even entangling themselves with others to buffer the intimacy they fear. It's not always about sex. Sometimes it's emotional breadcrumbs tossed to someone else, just enough to soothe their panic when closeness with you feels suffocating. And that's what makes it so confusing, because they can look you in the eyes and say, I'm not cheating, I'd never cheat. And technically, in their fractured logic, they believe that. Yet the reality is they are juggling. They are splitting themselves, they are feeding off multiple sources of validation while standing in the costume of a committed partner. This isn't about you not being enough. That's the lie you've probably been swallowing. It's about their fractured relationship with intimacy itself. An avoidant doesn't just avoid you, they avoid being fully consumed by any one person. They scatter themselves so they never have to risk being seen, known, or dependent. And if you've ever been with one, you know how destabilizing it feels to sense you're competing with shadows you can't even name. What if I told you this pattern has nothing to do with your worth and everything to do with their fear of closeness? What if the very behaviors that make you feel inadequate are actually the signs of their avoidance in action? Today, we're going to unravel exactly how avoidants juggle multiple partners while standing inside what looks like commitment, and why it leaves you questioning yourself instead of questioning them. The first thing you need to see is that the juggling doesn't begin with deceit. It begins with fear. An avoidant's deepest terror isn't losing you. It's needing you. The moment they sense they're getting pulled into a depth of intimacy that could actually anchor them, a survival alarm goes off inside. And rather than face that alarm head on, they deflect it. They reach for distractions. A coworker they suddenly text a little more often. An ex who still lingers on social media. A friend they keep just close enough to spark. To them, this feels like harmless hedging. To you, it feels like betrayal you can't prove. This is where the mind game begins. They may not even think of it as cheating, because in their compartmentalized world, what happens outside doesn't touch what they have with you. They convince themselves, this isn't real, this is just talking, this is just fun. But behind that minimization is a core truth they won't name. These little threads to others are their lifelines out of intimacy. They are escape hatches dressed as innocent connections. Imagine this. You've been noticing they pull away after a weekend together. You feel them go quiet, more distant, like their attention has shifted. And you ask them, gently, is something wrong? They look at you, slightly annoyed, and say, why do you always think something's wrong? You worry too much. And you start questioning yourself. Yet what you don't see is that while they're dismissing your intuition, they're simultaneously feeding another connection. Not necessarily because they want that person more, but because they want less of you in that moment. It's not about the other partner. It's about diluting you, about reducing the intensity they feel with you so they can breathe again. This is why so many people with avoidant partners feel like they're living in a hall of mirrors. You know, something's happening. You can feel the fragmentation. You can sense you're being placed in rotation with someone else, even if it's subtle, even if it's only emotional. But every time you reach for clarity, they make you doubt your own eyes. This is not an accident. This is part of the pattern. The juggling thrives on your self-doubt. So here's the shift. It's not that you're too sensitive or too insecure or imagining things. It's that you're picking up on what they're actively trying to blur. The juggling is not about finding something better. It's about their inability to tolerate the weight of your presence without diffusing it. And once you see this, you stop asking, "What's wrong with me?" and start asking the real question, why am I tolerating someone who needs to water me down in order to stay? Because the moment you realize this isn't about competition with other partners, but about their fractured intimacy with themselves, the power shifts. You stop trying to outshine ghosts. You start reclaiming your clarity. The second truth is that avoidants rarely juggle multiple partners for passion. They juggle to regulate themselves. Think about that for a moment. The very thing you thought was about attraction or desire isn't really about those things at all. It's about control. When they feel the pull of intimacy with you becoming too strong, they seek out someone else not because they've fallen head over heels, but because that extra thread helps them dilute what feels overwhelming. To them, another person is like a pressure valve, releasing the intensity they don't know how to manage. And here's the cruel twist. The more loyal you are, the more they feel the weight of your presence. The more consistent you are, the more suffocating it can feel to them. So while you're showing up with devotion and trust, they're slipping sideways into conversations with someone else, scrolling through messages that make them feel less cornered. They may even compare the lightness of those shallow exchanges with the depth of what you bring. Not because the shallow connection is better, but because it demands less of them, and in their fragmented mind, less feels safer. Have you ever noticed how they can be fully present with you one night and almost unreachable the next? That oscillation isn't random. That's the rhythm of their avoidance. When they've taken in too much closeness with you, they'll suddenly need to rebalance by leaning out, and often that leaning out is towards someone else. It could be a flirtation, a half-hearted emotional affair, or just the comfort of knowing there are other options circling. They don't even need to act fully on it. The very possibility gives them the illusion of freedom. And here's what's heartbreaking. You sense it. You feel the split, the inconsistency, the subtle betrayal, and yet you might find yourself chasing harder, trying to prove you're worth choosing fully, trying to be so irreplaceable that they'll finally close those side doors. But that's the trap, isn't it? The harder you chase exclusivity, the more suffocated they feel. The more suffocated they feel, the more they scatter, and round it goes, leaving you depleted while they keep their safety net intact. The shift here is recognizing that their juggling isn't evidence of your inadequacy, but evidence of their avoidance. The rotation of partners is not a testament to your lack. It's a coping strategy to manage their inner panic. Once you see that, you stop fighting invisible rivals and start naming the real pattern. Their intimacy tolerance is capped. And unless they face that within themselves, no amount of loyalty from you will change it. So ask yourself, is it really love if the person beside you must break themselves into fragments just to stay with you? Or is it just survival dressed up as connection? If this is landing for you, subscribe. We're just getting started. The third thing you need to see is how carefully avoidants craft a double life without ever admitting that's what they're doing. Unlike someone openly deceptive, their juggling often hides behind half-truths, vague boundaries, and plausible deniability. They rarely come right out and say, "I'm seeing other people." Instead, they leave just enough fog for you to question yourself. They say things like, "We're committed, but I need my space." Or, "I'm not doing anything wrong, you just don't trust me." And while their lips say exclusivity, their actions drip with subtle contradictions. You notice the phone turned face down, the hesitation before answering, "Who was that?" The sudden protectiveness over privacy they never cared about before. And yet, when you ask, They spin it back to you. You're controlling, you're paranoid, you're overanalyzing. Do you see the brilliance of this? By juggling in the shadows, they get to have it both ways. They get the security of being partnered while protecting the illusion of freedom. They get to soothe their panic with other connections while gaslighting you into believing you're the unstable one for sensing it. And this is why being with an avoidant can feel so maddening. It's not just the betrayal, it's the invisibility. You can't hold what you can't name. You can't confront what you can't prove. And so you start silencing your intuition, bending yourself into knots, trying not to be the jealous one, while they continue splitting themselves between worlds. That's not an accident. That's the silent architecture of their avoidance. Imagine this dynamic as a stage play. You're standing center stage, devoted, giving your whole self to the performance. You believe this is a two-person act, but in the wings, there are shadows, side characters the avoidant keeps in rotation. Maybe it's an old flame they still just check in with. Maybe it's a coworker who conveniently takes the edge off. Maybe it's a dating app they never really deleted, because it doesn't mean anything. And while you're center stage, carrying the weight of commitment, they're slipping in and out of the wings, keeping the crowd of distractions alive, just enough so they never feel trapped under the spotlight of real intimacy. Here's the shift. Once you see this, you stop arguing with their words and start watching their patterns. Because words are cheap to an avoidant. Their actions, the inconsistencies, the secrecy, the emotional crumbs they scatter, that's where the truth lives. And when you start trusting your perception instead of their projection, the fog begins to lift. The question becomes no longer, how do I make them choose me fully? But rather, why am I choosing someone who refuses to stand on stage with just me? That's where your power returns. That's when the juggling act collapses, because you're no longer willing to play your part in it. The fourth thing you need to understand is that avoidants don't just juggle to escape intimacy. They juggle to manage image. They want to be seen as the good partner, the loyal one, the steady choice. And that's why they'll go to great lengths to keep the rotation invisible. Because in their mind, if you never catch them, they're still the committed one. They get to preserve the mask of exclusivity while quietly feeding the fear that drives them. This is why they can show up to family gatherings hand in hand with you, smile in photos, and make long-term promises, all while texting someone else under the table. It's not hypocrisy in their eyes. It's survival. They convince themselves that as long as the main relationship stands, what happens on the side doesn't count. It's compartmentalization at its most dangerous. To you, it feels like betrayal. To them, it feels like balance. And here's the trap so many people fall into. You start competing with their image of themselves. You think, if I can just love them harder, if I can just prove I'm safe enough, they'll stop needing those side connections. But you're trying to fight a battle they've already outsourced. Because those other partners, whether they're emotional placeholders, flirty friendships, or secret affairs, they're not about being better than you. They're about feeding the avoidant's fragile self-concept. They're the insurance policy that keeps them from ever having to stand naked in the vulnerability of your full love. Have you ever noticed how they get defensive when you ask for clarity? How they twist the narrative so you feel like the one crossing boundaries? That's not clumsiness. That's strategy. By flipping the script, they keep their mask intact. They need you doubting yourself so they can keep their world split. Because if you ever trusted your instincts fully, the whole house of cards would tumble. This is the shift. The juggling isn't just about fear of intimacy, it's also about self-preservation of image. They want the loyalty of your devotion while secretly banking on the validation of others. They want the appearance of commitment without the surrender it requires. And once you see that, you stop being the defender of their reputation and you start being the guardian of your reality. So the question becomes, are you willing to keep protecting their mask, even as it costs you your clarity? Or are you ready to let the mask drop? Not because you've exposed them, but because you've chosen to stop living inside someone else's illusion. Send this to someone who's been stuck in this dynamic for far too long. The fifth thing you need to see is the cost this juggling exacts on you. Because it's not just about what they're doing in the shadows, it's about what their behavior trains you to believe about yourself. Living with someone who secretly scatters their intimacy forces you into a state of constant hypervigilance. You start scanning every silence, every pause, every shift in tone, looking for clues. You stop resting in love and start surviving it. And the irony is, the very loyalty you bring, the very consistency that makes you a safe harbor, becomes the rope they use to keep you tethered while they roam. Slowly, you begin to disappear. You question your instincts, silencing the little voice inside that says, "Something's off here." You abandon your needs because every time you voice them, you're told you're too much, too needy, too suspicious. You carry the weight of holding the relationship together while they drift in and out of other connections, and you tell yourself it must be love. Because why else would you fight this hard to prove your worth? But deep down, you know this isn't love, it's erosion. And here's the invisible wound. When someone juggles you with others, they're not just betraying your trust, they're training you to distrust yourself. That's the most damaging part. Because once you've internalized the belief that your intuition can't be trusted, you're far easier to control. You become quieter, smaller, more hesitant. You stop calling things what they are, and you start living in the space of what you hope they might one day be. Picture it like this. You're holding a cup of water, steady and full. They come to you thirsty, drinking deeply from your devotion. But instead of quenching themselves, they turn away halfway, reaching for other cups scattered around them. And you're left holding the cup, wondering if maybe you poured it wrong, if maybe it wasn't sweet enough, if maybe you need to hold it out longer next time. But the truth is, the problem isn't your cup. The problem is, they're incapable of drinking fully from one source without panicking. The shift here is reclaiming your own center. Recognizing that the exhaustion you feel isn't a flaw in you, it's the natural result of being stretched across someone else's fractured intimacy. And the moment you stop making their panic your responsibility, you begin to reclaim the pieces of yourself you lost in their juggling act. So let me ask you, how much longer are you willing to confuse the ache of being half held for the comfort of being fully loved? The sixth truth is that juggling isn't sustainable. It may look effortless for a while, the smooth lies, the charming cover-ups, the rotating connections, but beneath it all, the avoidant is living in fragmentation. They're splitting themselves across too many fronts, never able to rest fully in one place, never able to drink deeply from one well. And here's what happens. The more they scatter, the emptier they feel. Because while the juggling soothes their fear in the moment, it magnifies their loneliness in the long run. Think about it. When you're half present with everyone, you're fully known by no one. And that's the reality avoidants eventually face. They spend their lives escaping intimacy, only to wake up one day surrounded by fragments of connections that never added up to the real thing. They may not admit it to you. They may not even admit it to themselves. But the emptiness catches up. That's why you'll see them cycle back, knocking on your door after months of silence, or reaching out to someone they once pushed away. It's not love pulling them back, it's the collapse of their own house of cards. But here's where your power lies. You don't need to wait for that collapse. You don't need to stand by, drained and depleted, hoping they'll one day wake up and choose you fully. Because the truth is, the juggling stops being your problem the moment you refuse to stand in it. When you withdraw your energy from their game, the dynamic shifts. They're left holding their own emptiness, forced to confront the reality they've been avoiding all along. And that's when the final shift happens, not in them, but in you. You realize that their juggling was never a measure of your worth, but a mirror of their fear. You realize that your intuition was never wrong, it was silenced. You realize that real love doesn't require you to compete with shadows, dilute your light, or prove your irreplaceability. Real love doesn't juggle. Real love stands. So the question becomes, are you willing to keep playing in a circus that was never built for your soul? Or are you ready to walk away from the fragments and claim the wholeness you've been searching for all along? Because the moment you choose clarity over confusion, loyalty to yourself over loyalty to their mask, you step into a power they cannot touch. You stop being one of the balls in their juggling act. You become the one who finally sets it down. So here's where it all comes together. You've seen the truth of how avoidants juggle, not out of passion, but out of fear. Not because you're lacking, but because their intimacy tolerance is capped. You've seen how they scatter themselves to regulate their panic, how they craft a double life to preserve their image, how they train you to distrust yourself, and how the act eventually collapses under its own emptiness. But the real question isn't why they do it. The real question is, what will you do now that you can see it? Because clarity is both a burden and a liberation. It's painful to admit that the love you've been fighting for may have been a rotation all along. It's heartbreaking to realize that what you thought was commitment was in part a mask. But clarity is also the doorway. It's the moment you stop fighting ghosts, stop competing with shadows, stop waiting for someone fractured to finally show up whole. It's the moment you begin to remember yourself. You deserve more than being one piece in someone's juggling act. You deserve more than watered down attention, half-present love, and explanations that twist your intuition against you. You deserve a love that doesn't scatter, that doesn't hide, that doesn't make you question whether you're enough. You deserve a love that stands steady and real, with no side doors and no secret stages. And here's the most powerful truth of all. The moment you choose yourself, the game ends. Not because the avoidant suddenly changes, but because you refuse to participate in a dynamic that asks you to disappear. That's when you shift from waiting to be chosen to being the one who chooses. That's when the fog clears and the fragments fall away, and you finally stand in the light of your own wholeness. So I'll leave you with this question. Are you ready to stop being part of someone else's survival strategy and start living in the fullness of love you've always deserved? If you felt yourself in these words, if something opened in you tonight, subscribe. Not because I'm asking for numbers, but because this journey isn't one you should walk alone. We're building a space where clarity replaces confusion, where self-trust replaces self-doubt, and where love is no longer a game of juggling, but a sanctuary where you can finally rest.